Welcome everyone to our webinar series where we're going to talk today about Race Studio 3 user profiles. We have talked about user profiles in several different webinars. The folks may put some of those links into the chat box. If I mention anything in the chat box today, it's going to go. It'll be presented to the folks that are here live, and it'll also be in the description of the YouTube video if you're watching this later. If you just go down there, all of the links that I mentioned today will be available to you in the description box. So we're going to talk about user profiles. Again, we've done this. We've had this topic in small pieces or even full webinars. One specifically with Matt not too long ago, where Matt and I shared some of our favorite user profiles a few, close to a year ago maybe now. But what I wanted to do was bring in a number of people and talk about user profiles from folks that are using the software, working with customers that are learning the software as well, and I thought we would bring in some folks and do that. Those folks are Eric Gunderson is going to be here and kind of representing a karting market, talk about how maybe karters, maybe a couple of user profiles that might work well for karting. Chloe Lerin is going to be here, a favorite here. She's going to talk about some biking moto profiles that she uses. Jeff Wasilko is going to be here. Jeff has been a webinar co-presenter here with us a number of times. He's going to come on and talk with maybe a focus on some stuff that he does. He's an amateur sports car racer, a club level sports car racer, and talks to a lot of people in that world. And then Matt will come on at the end and share some of his, not only maybe from his own car, which is amateur road racer as well, but also from his pro level of some stuff that he looks at. He'll kind of talk about it from that perspective. So looking forward to having those on here in just a moment. But what we're going to do first is take a look at a couple things. I'm going to jump into Race Studio 3 in a moment, and we're going to talk about just some of the technical facts of user profiles to make, for those of you that are watching this, we're going to talk about the creating them just a little bit, saving them, and then of course exporting them, importing them, and using them on the cloud. How you can share those amongst your own computers, which is a very, very handy tool. So we'll talk briefly about that, and then we'll jump into our guests and have them join us and share how they use these particular things, these user profiles. I think it'll be pretty fun. So let me bring up Race Studio real quickly. The user profiles, what are they, right? User profiles, we've been using them since Race Studio 2. And really, I like to share those as, I use them, or I consider them to be just stored views, right? They are so much more in depth than that. But if you like the way your data is looking and it's something that you may want to come back to in the future, it's probably wise to save it as a user profile. I certainly sit in my desk before I go out to the track, and I'm looking at data and getting everything prepared and kind of the way I like to set it up. So the race, when you're under pressure at the racetrack for time, you have what you want to see, right, fairly quickly. But even that happens, you're at the racetrack and you start to working through some questions you have or some data, and you end up looking at it and you go, pretty soon you're tweaking things a little bit. You add a channel, a different view, and if you find yourself doing that, more than a couple of times to look at the data over the weekend, it really probably should be saved into a user profile of some sort. It's a time-saving maneuver that helps you just get through things in a much bigger and faster pace. So that's kind of what user profiles are. When we talk about user profiles, they're designed to save everything that you're looking at. And when I say that, it's let me load a profile, and then we'll talk a little bit more. When you have a test open, let's say, you can do it even pre-test, but I have this test open right now. And then when you click on the little cogged gear over here, you have a menu that pops up. there's options. You can save the profile that you're working on. You can save it with a different name. In other words, the save profile is basically you've tweaked the one that you have named, the one you're working on. In this case, it's banana braking. It's always shown in the first part of the tab. The user profile that is loaded is always shown here in the first part of the tab. And so I could resave this at any time. I make a tweak to it, an adjustment, come up here and hit the save profile button. James Coburn talks about that a lot and has on videos that webinars that he's been here with us and presented. Make sure you hit the save profile. There's no auto saving going on, so clicking on that is very handy. You could save it with a whole nother name. You could copy from another profile and just start to create your own. One you have that's kind of a core one. You bring it up, it'll bring it up, and then copy a new one. Or load profile. And that's what I'm going to do here is I'm going to load a default one that I tend to like to use. So we'll kind of start with mine loaded. What you'll see is the software goes and grabs that profile and it starts applying it against your data. It's really quite quick. It's done. I have a large profile. I have a lot of tabs. I have, these 6 tabs are all open here. So it took all of that plus all the laps you have open and applied all of that to that. And this is the way that I look at profiles. This is kind of my favorite way of looking at profiles. We'll briefly go over some of that. I look at profiles. The other thing is there's a split in how you ought to think about doing your profiles. Either one is correct. Either one can work for you. It's all good. Some people will say to do it like I have done it. It's what I'm most comfortable with. My profile is big and wide, right? I have my time distance plot is in here. It's part of my profile. I also have my XY plot. I've got my split times report, track. I've got all these tabs, right? And all I do in order to switch to looking at data in a different way is by clicking on the tabs inside of this single profile. I've got most of the ways I like to look at things are included in my single profile. There the other side of that people like to the way they like to save their profiles is save the profile for braking and for driver improvement and for and just save 3 or 4 profiles that cover the desire of the data analysis at that point. I'm okay with either one of them. I think they're both very valid. It's really a user preference. I happen to have gotten used to just having a bunch of different tabs here and then tweaking them if I need to. But it's good either way. So you've seen me go in there and you've seen me just load a profile. What is it doing? I was kind of heading down this road before I wanted to load this profile before I went there. I call it just saving a view, right? If you've made this particular graph this wide, you've added an XY plot, you wanted your video. It's not just that you've added those, but it's where they're placed, it's what their size is, all of that. It's the line colors, it's the scaling. There's a lot of information in the background that it's not just a view, it's all of the pieces of the view. Do you have like you notice here in my XY plot, I've got not only line work, but I've got the frequency of the actual data points of when they were gathered are showing here on my XY plot. I like that in a GSUM diagram like this is because I can see not only the outer line, but it helps me trace together where these lines were all tied together and what the driver actually did, right? So like over here, with this little curly Q, if you just had dots and you really were going to zoom in and figure out it was the driver releasing their hands right in the middle or whatever, having that little line work along with the dots makes that a little bit easier to understand exactly what happened. So the dots and line work sizes are there, the colors, the third channel. In this case, it's a lateral G's, longitudinal G, XY plot for GSUM. And then I've got that third channel, which is throttle position, to understand how all of that is affected by the redness being full throttle, the green down below being off the throttle. You could do it with brake pressure. You could pick your channel, but I use throttle in something like this so I can see exactly those things. That's saved. So you get an idea of all the different things that you can do with these and how they are saved colors, positions, all of the views, all of these things, whether you're in time mode or distance mode, things you might want to do are all available for you and stored in the user profiles. Okay, so the user profile is very valuable, very powerful. And so if I were to tweak one of these, let's say I take take these two channels out of here, the lateral G's and longitudinal G's on my time distance plot, I would come up and I would come in here and I say I want to hide those there, and then I want to not only hide them, but I want to get rid of the channel even overall. So I'm going to hide those out of that screen, take it out. I've kind of tweaked it. Maybe I want to adjust a little bit, maybe on the height of some of these. You get them exactly, you put them where you want them. And at this point, if I were to reload this profile, it would come right back with the lateral and longitudinal g-forces still included, because I haven't resaved it. So when you tweak anything like I just did, and you say, oh no, this is really what I want here, and all you need to do is come up to the icon for the options and save that profile. So Roger Default, my profile name that I'm working in right now, will be updated with these changes right there, right? And it's done. It's done. You can go through and tweak them all you want. Make sure you do the little save profile. The other powerful tool to this is the ability to export and import. And so you have these profiles that you're saving. Those are always, of course, files. And you can come into this same exact option, and you can save these profiles out. You can load the profiles from inside the test. But there's a couple of things that get me every once in a while. But they're the first one is there's nothing you can do with the profile that is loaded. If you open up if you go to the AIM website, you go to the software page, there's a draft manual there for Ray Studio 3. And if you go in there, they're very, very clear about Ray Studio user profiles, that you can only work with one profile at a time, and that one profile at a time is you can't save it, or you can't copy it or export it while it's active. So what you typically would do is you'd come in here to the All tab, and there's the that same look and style of a button there. Now you have a little bit more options with profiles, because you're not in a test, you're actually outside of the actual test. Now you can go find these profiles, and I'll just use Roger Default, pick that, and I can come there and I can export that. And as soon as I click on it, it's coming up and saying, where do you want it? I'm just going to put it on, you have to pick the folder, that'll be plugged in there, and you select it. That file of all of those settings has just been created, and it's been placed onto my desktop. Now, if I want to go in and import, let's say I put that in an email, send it to somebody, put them on my backup drive. So if I go to the racetrack and my computer dies, and I have to run off to Best Buy and buy a new computer real quickly on Saturday night. Not that that's ever happened to me. And then quickly you can just bring everything back up. If you go back in here to the options, and you can import profiles, and here are profiles that are that I have just saved. There's Roger Default that I just saved just a minute or two ago, right? 6:21, 10:14 a.m. Pacific Coast, where I'm at. So it gave it that name. It also gives it a time stamp of when it was actually created. So if I were to just go back in and save again and re-export it, it would be another one, but of course the timestamp would be slightly different. So you get an idea. Okay, so there's that file. If I wanted to import it, you just click on it here, and you import it onto your other machine. Okay, so the import-export is very powerful, works great. I'm sure there's things they'll continue to add and make work for it. The last thing I want to do before we jump in and start talking about looking at user profiles themselves is the ability to share the profiles on the cloud, the AIM cloud. This is something that's happening, that is available to you now for profiles, and it is my understanding that will be happening in math channels in the near future, and eventually even your data if you want to store it out on the cloud. AIM is still working through the concept of right now it's a free cloud space. It's limited in size. Obviously, we can't have 30 or 40,000 people saving everything they have onto the thing. So there will be a free cloud space with a minimum size of information. And then I think in the future, what you'll see is there will be always a free account available for you for the smaller things, and then there will be the opportunity to purchase space where you can store all of your data on if you wish. So that is coming in the future. But if we want to work on the cloud side, profiles shared with other PCs. I have only a couple of them that I've done that with, but you've got these profiles here. I've got one that's called Armadillo, and I've got one that's called Roger Default, the one we've been looking at. As I log in under my name, my email address up here, on any machine that I go to, underneath this button, there will be profiles shared with other PCs. These two profiles will show up. I could put 8 of them. I could put 15 of them, but these are the ones that I have on here for this demonstration. So you can share these and then go and load the profiles from the cloud on any other machine. So very, very powerful. I've found that to be very useful. I take a laptop to the track. We're working. I adjust them. I tweak them. I want other ones, and then when I come back to the track, back to my PC, I bring the data in, and I bring in the profiles that have been shared on the cloud off of my PC, bring back to my have it update my desktop, and now the data I'm looking at has all of those updated profiles and ready to be looked at the way I like it. So very powerful tool that I think is very, very handy and maybe a little underused so far. So that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to go through the technical part of what is a profile, what is the profile, what is saving it with a new name, saving it, just resaving it as you make changes, exporting, importing, and sharing on the cloud. Those are kind of fundamental things that you probably need to know when working with profiles and how to use those effectively. So, okay. As we go, those of you that are live, if you have any questions you want to do, go ahead and throw those up into the question box. We're gonna invite in now. Some of our guests are gonna take 7, 8, 10 minutes or so. We've got about 30 minutes to chat with the 4 of them about profiles that they have used a little bit and are happy with, and why they have set them up a certain way, how that seems to be valuable for them and their customers that they work with or users that they help support. So we're going to start with Eric. Eric is here. Eric Gunderson from Point Karting out of Colorado. Thank you for coming, Eric. I appreciate it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share on my computer, and Eric is going to go ahead and pop his up there, and then we're going to chat about. And Eric, there it's starting to come up, and there it is, Eric. Eric,
Yay.
give us give us the 10 or 15-second bit about you and what you do with Point Karting, and then let's chat about what you share with your kart racers.
Yeah, so Point Karting is fundamentally a sales and retail kart parts company, mostly online, but we also, of course, have a brick and mortar kart shop, and some of you may have seen me talking off screen. We have people coming in and out of the shop, but that is what we do. We also have a little race team that we go to the track with and do driver coaching with. And admittedly, I don't look at data directly with drivers as much as I used to, but when I do, the Micron 5 unit is incredibly powerful, but some of the sensor outfits compared to, say, a car or a bike are not as advanced. So we've tried different user profiles and different channels over time, but honestly, I've found just going back to square one and keeping it fairly simple with some fairly simple basic channels is most effective for most of our racers. Every now and again, we'll get more advanced than that, but I can give a quick walkthrough here.
Yeah, as you're getting ready to do that, as I travel around to kart tracks and get calls from users, I've got a Zoom meeting with a user tomorrow for about an hour to go over some things. Everybody that calls, not everybody, but like you said, very close. Micron 5, and that's it, right? So it's got the GPS information, the speed, RPM, and a temperature or two, and that's what you're going to show here today is how to. That is a lot of information already, and so as you've been working with people, what kind of channels and stuff, and what's the setup that you share with them?
So, the one thing to keep in mind with karting, unlike a lot of other forms of motorsport, is the intervals over which things on track happen are extremely, extremely tight. Um, I've looked at sports car data and even some motorcycle data, and the gaps in time and the role of the vehicle is much more dramatic than in karting. And again, since we have the Micron 5, which is a very capable device, but typically we don't have that many sensors attached to it, the channels that we can really look at meaningfully and really glean a lot from quickly are a little more limited, unless, of course, you get out the expansion pack. So for us, what we typically do is I'll pull up my speed trace for a driver and my lateral and longitudinal G traces for that same driver. Seeing how the cart loads in a longitudinal sense, as well as laterally in the middle of the corner, and seeing how the driver turns the wheel and how that affects things is probably one of the most critical things that I like looking at. Roger and I have worked on some more advanced math channels for sweep and radius, and every now and again we'll integrate that. But for most racers, just simply looking at these three channels is more than enough. Of course, if I get into working with a two-stroke racer that has a water-cooled engine, we might want to look at exhaust gas temperature. We might want to look at things like gear selection in a shifter cart. But the way I have my user profile set up, it's pretty easy for me to just go over to the channels and turn those on and off and make that more complicated if I want it to. With the driver coaching that we do, we end up sometimes working with younger racers that are still developing. So that's where looking at something like our split times report or our channels report, and I like having mine set up where I can see, I'll sort it and have it pre-sorted before I talk to a driver, kind of the trend of where we're driving and how they're driving. Often maybe the caliber driver that I work with, just for my own preference, I like having those sorts of trends set up, because at the end of the day, if we're using data as a coaching tool for others, then we want to have some actionable things that they can go and do. So that is honestly the major walkthrough of what I do. My track channel today has been misbehaving a little bit. Roger and I were working on that, but typically I have a full-size track map that I like pulling up. But having a track map, regardless of whatever you're doing, whatever form of motorsport you're doing, having a track map that as you scroll along, you can see where the heck you are is extremely important.
So you have some your basic channels, and you share this with some of your other users in your area, certainly. Then you break it up into a couple of different things that appear to be mainly driver performance type tools, because it's karting. You're in a learning world for a lot of kart drivers, obviously. So your split time report gives them an idea how consistent they are. The track, when we do get that to work, being on Zoom takes a lot of bandwidth on top of your computer. Yeah. And so then your driving line, you can help them look at that, and it's all quick and fast. So when you show up, you open up your laptop and you get their data on there, and then the channels report where you're looking at min speeds, max speed, all the different things. So really, while the data is powerful and you got a lot of information from your Micron 5, there's 4 tabs that you spend a lot of time working in, and it takes care of apparently what most of your users will
need. The vast majority of our racers, yeah. And for anyone that is watching this, on YouTube later on, or anyone in the chat, the 2 channels that I would turn on here that I would be looking at an additional would be exhaust gas temperature for a lot of 2-cycle water-cooled or air-cooled engines, or a shift indicator, seeing where we're shifting if we're consistent. But again, that's very dependent on the driver. Unlike other forms of motorsport, most of the customers that I work with and most racers use a single-speed clutch-driven go-kart. So that's typically why I have it set up the way I do.
Perfect. I appreciate that. And you mentioned one thing as you were going, and you can unshare and get ready for. We're going to go to Chloe in a second. What's one thing you said there as we're kind of wrapping up this karting one that I found really quickly? I first started using data in karting. That was where I learned about data, as my son was starting to kart, and microns were brand new at the time, and I've just started to be able to download the data a long time ago. And and I did that for a while, and then I started to venture into some road racing car stuff. And what you just said is absolutely perfect. The hardest data for me to work with, in because things happen so quickly. They're such violent animals. Carts are that boy, you can change directions in no time and very very quick. It is hard data to work with. If you can analyze data in karting down to that finite level because of things are happening so quickly. When we first went to sports cars and started to look at it, and you're in a corner for 8 or 9 seconds, and in a cart you're in a corner for 8 or 9 tenths, right? And
Yep.
it was just, yeah, it's scale, and you can zoom in, you can see some things, but that was harder than sports cars. So I appreciate that statement.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would say, and my advice to any racers, is when you're setting up your user profile, keep in mind that there's, because of how violent, I'm sure this is probably true on a bike as well, just how violent the ride is for the device. There's going to be a lot of inherent noise involved. And
Yeah.
so sometimes not getting overly invested in chasing that noise or looking at noise in a channel or in your data is also valuable to consider.
We Race Studio 3 in our math channel webinar just a few weeks ago, I think we talked about a couple of new filters that they have that are going to be extremely valuable for everybody, but even probably more so with karting. They've got a rolling average math channel now that I have found it works great with all that harmonics and noise. Karts don't have chassis, right? They don't have suspension to deaden that up, and small tight tires, and you'll get a little vibration and harmonics in especially the G sensor stuff. And some cool filters are coming that I think will help you as well. Okay, I see a couple questions there. We'll get to those at the end if possible. The next person, you can turn off your camera if you wish, Eric. The next person I'd like to turn on their camera is Chloe. Chloe has been a webinar co-host here any number of times, and has been great to have with us. And Chloe, go ahead and share your screen. And it should, there you, as it comes up. Chloe's been with us a number of times, a motorcycle racer herself and a data engineer in Moto America. So she's developed a number of ways of doing user profiles, but one of her newer tasks that last couple of years, she's been traveling around and also providing support at bike races, and so she's talking with lots of motorcycle users. So she's got her own way of doing things that she's figured out for her own benefit, and then she has found ways of sharing and showing different people user profiles of best practices of looking at data in motorcycles. So Chloe, tell us a little bit about. It looks like you follow my method of a lot of tabs with a single, which is fine,
right?
And I've liked that myself. But talk a little bit about what you have set up here and how you share that with people.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons for the many tabs compared to go karting, for example, and is, I guess, allowed by a segue that from Eric. We on motorcycles have different ECUs. We never use, at least I've never seen a Micron on a motorcycle. So we mostly use a Solo 2DL, Evo 4, Evo 5s, or full MXS systems. So something that I don't personally use unless I'm only working with a Solo 2 or all of the longitudinal acceleration. I tend to use them if I have something really weird and I want to dig into it a little bit more. But I tend to mostly try to read the information from my ECU. So the very first tab that I have is just a simple time distance, where for a start, I will just take the GPS feed. So it's normalized and it's pretty clean and filtered. So I like that. Then I will look at my RPM, which is something we have on motorcycles that's very good. And I really like to have this feature that's allowed by RS3, which is the coloring of your maximum limit. So if I go to my ECU RPM, here I have my minimum and maximum for the specific motorcycle. That allows me to see where the bike is over revving, if it's only on shift, like we see here, or maybe if there is sustained periods where in a corner, for example, we're over revving. And in the last webinar, I talked about how the lean angle can actually affect RPM and how we choose gearing as a function of that. Next thing that I have is the gear. And then I have my TPS hand, so the grip on the motorcycle, as well as the brake pressure. And I like to have it in a reverse function like this, so I can see clear transitions and how smooth the riders are from, going from off the throttle to the brake, and then trailing the brake. We have here a very good shark fin brake pressure trace, and going back to a really good upward throttle trace, sorry. And then the last thing for motorcycles, very important to have, is the lean angle. So the lean angle can be either calculated from the AIM system, or we can also take it from the IMUs of the bike. So then I transition to, it's a channel report. For some reason, it's called track because I just modified an initial track map. But I check the health of my motorcycle. So I will have, just as far as performance, the maximum GPS speed, and then I have, which is going to be my minimum brake pressure, because now I have a reverse channel. I check my RPM range, minimum and maximum, see if we need, that's the first thing that I would check for maybe a gearing change, and then the health of the motorcycle as far as temperatures. Then I have the power modes. Usually the power modes don't change much during a lap or a session. We set them before. And then something that's very important for motorcycles is going to be your suspensions. So minimum, maximum, and average of position for the front and the rear, as well as minimum, maximum, and average of the velocities. So we usually have an idea of which range we want to be in, and this is usually the first thing that we look at. Split time report, like everybody uses, really good to have all of your split times within the different sectors, and I tend to use the same sectors as what we have on our Moto America tracks. Then I move to suspension, and I guess I should talk about the chassis first. So I guess it's a kind of a time distance 2.0, where I still use the brake and the throttle to see what the rider is doing. And then I translate that, or see how that translates into front suspension and rear suspension. So I'm just looking at position here, but that gives me an idea of how the bike is behaving, how much it's pitching forward, how much the rear is raising, without looking at velocities yet. So it shows us, effects, for example, of shifts. It shows us effects of braking, and gives us an idea of really where the bike sits. And then I like to go to a more suspension dive in, I guess, tab, where now we're looking at our wheel speeds. That's something that we get from the ECU on more advanced bikes. Now we can actually see, for example, here, it's not crazy, but we can actually see that the rear wheel, and I can zoom in, the rear wheel is dropping. So we're actually slipping here. So we can see how that translates in rear wheel speed. Like we can see that we're fully extended here. That allows us also to zoom on the velocity that I calculate. And I'm trying to reproduce the option that we had in RS2 that we do not have yet on RS3 analysis yet, which is the histogram. So I found the histogram being a very good, here we go, we can actually see the numbers. It's a very good way to look at the overall behavior of the bike, and how our suspensions are actually, like what speed we're actually using. And that usually tells us if we need adjustments in rebound and compression.
And that is those last two tabs she just brought up is we're going to do the webinar with Chloe. Our next webinar will be the first Tuesday in July 6th, I think. Somebody shared that with me just a little bit ago. I believe it's going to be Chloe, and we're going to talk about suspension in Race Studio 3. So we'll get a little bit more detail in those two tabs here in a few weeks. July 5th. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think for the suspension analysis, we really need to have a track map to see where we are in, in which part of the corner we are. So that is something that I'm learning. I feel like I might have a lot more information that maybe a suspension specialist will have, just because I'm really learning. I'm really trying to absorb as much as I can and try to get a good picture of how the bike's moving. Then I like to have, and I can on zoom, if I move this. Then I like to have just a quick overview of the health of the bike again, or the health of the electronics. So I have my voltage, again, my RPM, lambda when I have it, when it's available on the bike, those that have a LCU1, and then, you know, just look at engine coolant temperature, ambience. Some bikes will have, some ECU protocols will be provided with ignition, injection, and, you know, just think about TC slip and stuff like that, for example, which is really good to have for an overview of just the health of the bike in general. And that's a segue into the electronics, where I have, so for example, here I have my throttle plate, not the throttle hand. So I'm actually able to see the blips that you won't see on the hand, but that are just generated from, you know, the auto blip function. I also have my wheel slip that is directly generated by the ECU, and so generally the wheel speeds come from the ECU as already corrected for lean angle. So the internal IMU actually corrects for lean angle, and so now we have a clean wheel speed. And from the wheel speed, we have a wheel slip calculation. I like to have a calculation that I run myself, which is generally it's the rear minus the front divided by the front, and then it's a percentage, which is good to have to see sort of how the ECU calculates it and if there is additional corrections. And the last one, going through everything, this is one that I've been working on quite a bit this week. And this is not the bike that I'm working with. This is Nolan Lemkin's data, which he's been sharing publicly with everybody every year. But in the bikes that I am working with at Moto America, we've been chasing something that puzzled us a little bit, and I probably shouldn't talk about it too much, but we've seen a large amount of slippage approaching a corner, and I really wanted to understand if it was an engine braking issue, if it was a chassis issue. And so I built this profile that has been really useful, that uses, you know, so the wheel speed, front and rear. Here we have our throttle position and our hand, so we can actually see the engine braking strategy, RPM, change in gears, and then positive wheel slip and negative and positive wheel slip, as well as suspensions. So that tells us, you know, where the rear wheel is, if it's touching the ground or not, if our engine braking is actually effective, where we sit in the RPM range. And if you have an idea of what your torque map looks like, then you can actually see maybe how much power you're delivering as far as negative power.
This is a perfect example of Chloe has been using. I've worked with her a little bit, and I've seen some of these tabs and this user profile, and then she's diving deeper into a specific situation. Maybe it was at the track, maybe it was at home as she was thinking through it before she goes to the track. But then engine braking is born because she just, you know, I really want to know this, so let's build a new tab. We've got now custom tabs that we can add. She added it, built this screen to handle the things she needs to know. So next time when she goes to the track, she gets what she thinks gives her some tools. And probably what's going to happen when she's actually starts working with actual data at the track, she'll find, well, no, you know, that worked really great. I need maybe this, I need to tweak this. She'll adjust it, and she'll continue to save that profile. And she's just building another tab that is that answers a question for her that she needs to have done at the track. So the perfect way to use profiles.
Absolutely. So yeah, I go on Spurs sometimes. I read a book, and the book has some really good insights on what they're looking at, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I actually could run that calculation. I have the data, and so then I start building, and that's why my tabs are multiplying.
Yeah, exactly.
But they have a use, I promise.
There probably will be some point, it would be with me at least, that you'll be building these, and pretty soon I would start to break them up into a drivetrain and a, engine health one, something like that, if they get super
Possibly.
large, right? Because
Yeah.
if you got a good computer, they load up in a second or two, but as they get bigger and bigger, there's more and more math happening in the background.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you, Chloe. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
If you want to stop the share, and then we will, Jeff, if you want to start your share, I will also add, while Jeff is bringing his stuff up, that hardly anything is new anymore, right? I have learned a lot in 20 some odd years of working with data, and almost everything that I've learned has been of something I've either seen somebody else do, I've read in a book, I have seen, chatted with other people that are doing something. There's hardly anything new to invent, right? So the stealing of ideas and ways of doing things is an appropriate tool in our world. If you see something, I like that, I really want to know that about my car or my customers, yeah, boom, you have it. So Jeff, tell us just a little bit about you. Let me just start off with, I've known Jeff for 8 or 10 years now, and we've been chatting and friends for quite some time. And Jeff is a Mazda racer, Miata racer for the most part, and in road racing, has been on with us and has done a couple of webinars. And I just appreciate all your help and friendship over the years, including some networking issues I had in order to make all of this work for the webinars as we were getting started. So it's been very helpful that you've been helpful to me, and I appreciate it. So you have some data here that you share with a lot of what you do on your own, obviously, and then but you also support a lot of people out there at the track, which is much appreciated by all of us. And you need to show some different people some different things, and share with us here what you use and share with other folks.
Yeah, so as you were saying, right, I'm mostly self-coach. Occasionally I get a chance to work with some professional coaches who help me, but I spend a lot of time helping other folks out. As part of one of the groups that I run with, a time trial club in the Northeast, we have an advanced coaching program where we both do in-car coaching, but also out-of-car data-based coaching. And a lot of that's supported by Matt. He's loaned us a bunch of AIM solos, and they're pretty much all checked out every weekend. And when we have time, we try to help people both become better self-coaches, because right, once a driver sort of in our program becomes licensed, they're sort of off on their own, and they've got to figure out how do they get faster. And that answer to that is data. That's been my way that I've gotten faster. And thankfully, every year I get a little faster. And so we spend time showing people sort of more advanced stuff, but I also spend a lot of time trying to help people figure out the basics of just the AIM software. I mean, when, especially in the RS2 days, people would be like, oh my God, the software is just so terrible. It launches, and why is it showing me like the logger temperature, right? And so the thing that I always spend time with folks is like, the biggest thing is, if you spend 15 minutes or so, set up a profile when you're not under the pressure of being at the track, right? That user profile basically just means you can load your data and see it exactly the way you want it all the time. And there's really nothing more than that. It's probably the most important thing for me in Race Studio for new users. And so if you're new and looking at this and a little intimidated, this is the key to going from like, oh my God, this is really frustrating, to, wow, this is super, like I can just jump in and start looking at data. So speaking of looking at data, so as I said, I'm going to show a little bit about like what I look at for myself, but also when I'm working with multiple drivers. I think it was maybe Kyle that asked a question about what do you do when you have different cars or different loggers? And I tend to have different profiles for different configurations or different drivers. I've been working with a couple of drivers that are sharing our car, so I have a custom setup for them for some stuff we're looking at that's set up just for their car and their ECU channels. So for me, this start out with the basic time distance graph, looking at kind of the money channels, speed, the throttle position, brake pressure. And I love it. Chloe reminded me of the thing that I forgot to do for a long time, which is invert the brake channel. I just love the way that you see the transition from throttle to brake. And so I was like, oh yeah, I should throw that back in, because I kept forgetting about that. So
she showed that just a couple of weeks ago in a webinar she did with us, and the light bulb went on in my head too. I love doing these because there is not a single webinar of the ones we've done that I haven't learned something, and that was one of the latest. That was cool.
Yeah, for sure. And so beyond that, then I for my car, I have a channels report that I look at as sort of car health. And I think like early on when I first started using Race Studio 3, I think it was maybe Matt suggested having a user profile that was like driver and a user profile that was car health. And I messed around with that for a little bit, but it sort of settled on like, there's really no reason necessarily to split that up. because you can easily have it all together and switch between it. So I have a bunch of things in my channel report that just show me car health, so I can come in and look at the data and just make sure that everything looks like it's in range. Both competing and instructing, I don't have a lot of time between sessions, and so this again makes that efficiency possible, because you just don't have a lot of time. And then beyond that, the classic split time report, particularly looking at rolling or theoretical best, and looking at sector times, particularly if I'm working with other drivers, can sometimes be helpful, especially if you can compare two drivers in a similar car, particularly two drivers sharing a car. That becomes really good.
Even more powerful. Yep.
Exactly. And then, so if I just jump back here to time distance, right, I've got a track map and I zoom in, and it seems like I spend a lot of time, like when I'm looking at data with people, it's often hard for them to look at like the GPS speed trace and just be able to imagine where they are on the track, right? Like once you look at it enough, you can say, okay, this is turn 5 at Palmer. But a lot of people keep wanting to go back to the maps to say like, okay, well, really, where am I? And then sometimes there's questions about like really deep questions about driven line, and having a page ready that's got like a big track map in it for me helps just be able to go jump into that really quick, because driven line can play such a big difference.
Yeah.
And then I don't have movies loaded up on this desktop, but I also have a tab ready so that if I've got movies linked, I can do that and jump to play it really quickly without having to mess around with anything. Because again, I think time is just so hard to find at the track. And so everything you can do to just be ready for it makes a big difference.
So you've saved a fairly lean number of tabs, but it is exactly what you want and what you have found to be the most useful when you're talking with and trying to train other drivers. So
exactly. And as I mentioned, we have this program where we loan out Solo 2s and Solo 2 DLs. And so very often I'm working with drivers who only have a Solo 2 or DL, so very limited number of channels compared to, my car's got a pretty good set of data, nowhere near what Matt's car is. But so I keep a profile ready that is just what I would say is the money channels for a Solo 2, right? All you have is GPS speed, Lonjet, and lat, right? That's it, because that's all you're going to get from a Solo that's stuck into a car. You can still do an awful lot about it. It's you can really infer a lot about braking from the launch acceleration.
Yeah. I've always talked about those GPS-based channels of a Solo to DL. Of course, you're going to get ECU channels, but so you can get 90% of the way there with the GPS-based channels. Maybe you wanted to know a little bit more about how the person was manipulating the throttle pedal. You can't get that, but you can certainly see it in the longitudinal acceleration to a point, right? So kind of cool.
Exactly, and then I have the same thing. If I know I'm going to have, if I want somebody a Solo 2 that's going to have RPM and maybe throttle position because it's a modern car, I can pull this one up, and I don't have to mess around with trying to load channels or anything. AIM's done a lot to sort of normalize these channel names. Like it used to be, I remember back in the day, I had a Haltech ECU, so my throttle position was like HTPS or something. Yeah. And the fact that now the channel names are all generic. That's an ECU throttle position, whether it's coming from a BMW or my car or something else, makes it really easy to just have a profile that's ready to go.
And that's getting even better and better all the time with the function of the way the channel is saved as a certain function. Your throttle position will go into that box, even no matter what the name is, and that's kind of handy.
And I look at that, like all of that stuff that leads to efficiency. Track time is expensive. Track weekend is expensive. And if you can, if AIM can save me a little time whenever I'm looking at data, or particularly if I'm helping somebody else look at data when I could be looking at stuff for myself, but like if I can be a little more efficient and help them out, and then maybe have some more time for somebody else or for me. So that's key. And so I would say if you ever are in a situation where you're working with another car, particularly if you're trying to compare your data to somebody else and you've got some channels that are in common and some that aren't, save a profile for that so you don't have to mess with it again. Yeah. I have some other drivers here. I've got a friend that, he just picked up an SRF3 and we were working and coaching. So I was comparing my Miata to his SRF3 and it's got a good ECU with lots of channels. And so we were able to look at a bunch of different stuff. And so the same thing. And then I have cases where I'm working with a couple of drivers that are sharing the same car. I can just load up their profile. And it also, for me, from a coach perspective, if their profile always looks the same, right, they can start to get a little more comfortable looking at the data because I always use the same setup for them.
And you showed it a couple of times, but you didn't actually say it. The time that it would take to bring open a channel and place it in the right spot and change the colors or the scaling or whatever it happened to be, and the time that it was taking you to load a profile, because you had you'd already ran into this once, so you said, "Oh, let me just save a profile on it." It was a tenth of the time to load the profiles, and it just was snap. Yeah. So these profiles are so powerful, and your examples are just fantastic.
So yeah, I would say, I mean, again, like I said at the beginning, for me and for, like when I first started using RaiStudio 2, starting to get comfortable with user profiles was the key to efficiency and to not having the software sort of be frustrating when I was under the gun. And the RaiStudio 3, the profiles I think are so much more they're user-friendly, and like some of the stuff again that's happening with like the channel name mapping and stuff, just like it works. I sometimes have moments now where I'm like, oh, this is really working the way I would really want it to. It's really working to support me. So yeah, user profiles are key to being really quick. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Perfect. I appreciate it, Jeff. You've added. You've talked about what you've done, and you've added to what the others had already talked about. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Jeff. Matt Romanowski is next with us. Matt is outside of his office, and there is possibly some lag, maybe occasionally on his web-based stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to share his stuff on my end. If I can get that out of the way, let me do that and share screen on my own. Come on, baby, there we go. And let's see if it pops up. Come on, there we go. Should be coming. So there's Matt's data, and Matt's here. I think his audio is good. Matt, check that out for me if you would.
Yeah, that looks great.
There you are. There you are.
I kind of wanted to. Oh, I was just saying, I wanted to share two different profiles. And this one I actually used someone else's data who I can't share. So I called it banana braking because everybody refers to my car as the banana. And something a little different that I don't do as much as I probably should, and I need to get in the habit of, is we saw Roger and Chloe and Jeff and Eric have all their profiles have multiple tabs in them. And I'm still sort of in that single tab to a profile mode. And I think I need to change it because the way I work isn't really in single pieces. But I wanted to share these two because I thought they were pretty neat. This one's a pretty simple profile. Across the bottom, I have brake pressure. And this is one where we're really when I want to dig into how someone's braking and look at some things. And then above that on the right, we have a friction circle because it's a really easy way for people to look at longitudinal versus lateral Gs. It's an idea we all understand. And then we color it by brake. I think actually Roger has this one colored by throttle position.
I have by throttle position, but you typically would be brake pressure, probably is a better one.
Yeah, either one, depending on how you kind of look at things. Yeah. And but it gives you chances, when you interpret the data a little bit. I figured out that it was throttle position because we know red is usually more, and we can see the red at the top. So if it was brake pressure, it'd be flipped most likely.
Yeah.
But a great way to kind of look at that and to put those three ingredients of your driving together. And then on the left, I have an XY plot. And in this one, I'm showing longitudinal G-forces, so how hard the car's stopping, and on the vertical, it's brake pressure. So this tells us a little bit about our brakes and how they're acting and everything else. And a neat way that I think to evaluate braking a little bit is if we pick a segment, Roger, to zoom in on that has a brake pressure in it. Yeah. And as we go along our time distance, we can see that for one brake pressure, we get two different amounts of slowing and how quick the car's slowing. And what it's called when we have different outputs for the same input is hysteresis, big word, right? And it means for one brake pressure of say 500 pounds, we might be slowing at 0.6 Gs or we might be slowing at 1 G. Well, why does that happen? Well, that's the brake pad responding differently. And it could also be in different phases of the corner as we're driving through. But it gives us something that we can start to dig into, and maybe you're thinking about trying a different brake pad, or you're trying to tune your car and how it responds to things, whether it's in the brake ducts or something else. That's a great spot to start looking at and saying, do I always get the same output for my input? we do that with steering and throttle and everything else. Well, with brake pressure, this is a nice, simple way to kind of dig into it and look at it a little bit. So pretty simple profile, but pretty powerful as you start to dig into it. And
I think it's not intuitive. I'm sorry, Matt, but I think it's not intuitive to a lot of people that would think this is almost a straight line. And I think this is a fantastic way of looking at this. That at this point where I put the cursor at the peak of your longitudinal G's, and it is not the peak of your pressure. It is not the peak of your longitudinal G's. That is over here, right? Right about here is when the car has the most negative G forces as it's going, and that's interesting how the brake pads, get heated up, and you can change brake pads, in between sessions and adjust this for front to rear, which is something we did a lot when we raced to try to get the balance right when the driver is driving super hard under the brakes. So.
Yeah, and Kyle in the comments here makes a great point about if it's different between corners, this could be track topography, right? We bring in one of my favorite channels of GPS altitude.
Yeah.
And we see, is this the track doing it? He says maybe it's the chassis dip, the nose of the car starting to dive when we hit the brakes. We saw that in Chloe's data with the bike fork. Another way you can dig in and go, is this the car loading the front? Is it changing? So really powerful as we choose that we want to dig in here and see some different stuff. Kind of profile that looks really simple at the beginning, but if you add a couple channels to that time distance, you really start to bring in the power of Race Studio 3 and how you can evaluate all these different areas.
Okay, and you had, I think, one other profile, right?
Yeah, and the reason I picked this one was I was talking on an online forum about profiles, and a guy, Mike Loeb, he's run a whole bunch of MX5 Cup races. The guys in the AIM office probably know him from that. Maybe you've seen him on the result sheet. And he said, I'd love to use Race Studio 3, but I need it to look like this. And he gave me a screenshot of his old Race Studio 2 profile. He goes, I didn't make it. I don't know how they did it, but I want this. And I said, cool, I'll make that for you. So I did it. I called after him. And again, you look at it and you go, geez, there's only 3 things here. But when you start to use it, you realize that it kind of has all the 3 things that you really need, right? Like kind of to Eric's point with his profiles is it doesn't look really fancy, but if you want to get better, it's got all the tools here that you need. So at the top left, we have that track map. And right now we can see, we could zoom in on a portion if we want and see the car placement on it. Or we could turn off the Google view and put a colored measure on it. So one graphical element that will tell us a whole bunch of different things depending on how we want to use it. Roger's going in and we can pick to color by a channel and then pick one of these channels.
Just
so as he picks up throttle position, a pretty neat one, and you can see the areas of red where it's full throttle. We can see the areas of blue where there's no throttle. See where in that corner we pick up the throttle, where we do all these different little things and these nuances with our driving inputs that make the big difference in lap time. So really powerful tool there. To the right of it, again, we have that friction circle. One of the ones I really like the most to use with drivers because it's really easy to see. In the addition of having the circles behind it, now you're not going, oh, did I have a little bit more grip? Really quickly, you can see where it's reaching the maximum on braking, and we see a portion in the corner, and we see the hole that's left. And we go, okay, that's a spot to work on. And as we zoom in and those points change, we can start to see what part of the track this is on. And then below it, I did a simple time distance. And with this time distance, I have really, like Jeff mentioned, those money channels. And we have GPS speed, throttle position, brake pressure, and steering input. So we have the main result that helps us go quicker in speed. And then as a driver, I have the 3 inputs that I can act upon. My throttle position, my brake, and my steering. And with those, that gives you the tools to see what you're doing. And as you start to add more in, you see the whole interaction. So you get that dynamic link between the point you click in the time distance graph, where that point is on the map, and you can color it by what you want, or you can show it by the actual car position, and you can see it in that friction circle to see how you're doing. So to me, these were kind of two profiles that I looked at and I said, if you don't have a lot of data, or if you have a lot of data, in my car, I still look at these because this gives me so much power to dig in and get the inputs that I do and see how I can evaluate them. And as I turn on laps and I do everything else, the only thing that I start to add is that video. And then I can see with the video exactly what I was seeing at the time, right? And it helps me call back some of those things, and it helps to dig into the data a little bit further.
It is the core of, it's that 90% of what you're probably going to look at. It is right here.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. And you did have another tab here that probably has just without the XY plot, it looks like. And so you can look at it like that, or add the XY plot because you had the Mic Globe tab over here. So in this particular case.
Yeah, and you know what, Roger? It's funny you point that out, because until you said that, it was something I don't always think about. I almost always have a time distance layout in all of my profiles.
Me too.
Only because I'll pop to that as sort of, I go, well, geez, what's going on?
Home
and then
base.
I add another measure. So
Yeah.
if we're talking about why did the car dive, to Kyle's point, I will pop in suspension position all of a sudden and go, okay, what did the suspension do? Or if it's, I want to look at the G forces and I want to dig into, did I hit a curb there, right? We had a chat in the comments in the chat talking about, do vertical G's show up from a flat spot or a curb hit? Well, then I'll add them here and I'll start to dig into that more and say like, oh, do we see that? So I always have one of those as kind of like a scratch pad and a different way to dig into some of that data.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. We're kind of running up against the top of the hour here. So, Matt, if you would, you don't have to unshare. I'm in charge of that, right? So now that I think about it, let's. Yeah, exactly. For those of you here that are here live, I'm gonna kind of close out the recording for YouTube, and then I'd like you to stay on. I'm gonna stop the recording, and I'd like to add give some of you that arrived as we were just starting a little bit of information that is not timely for the YouTube stuff. They'll be watching that 2 or 3 years down the road. So if you're here, please hang on with us. I'd like to chat with you once we end the recording. The this video that we're doing here is being added to our YouTube site. If you haven't been to our YouTube site, just go to YouTube, type in AIM Data, and there's just a ton of videos in there, 213 as of now, and growing. And in almost all of them, we put down into the description box links to other ones that are related to that ones, right? So just a ton of good information there, and much more to come very shortly. So. Customer support, boy, this is that time of year. We're out there. Of course, we're a 365 customer support company, but right now you see us a little bit more often out at the track in the middle of the racing season. And I know all of our tech staff are going like crazy, visiting racetracks every single weekend and working all during the week, handling your other support calls and needs. So give us a call if you don't see us out at the track. 800-718-9090 is our tech support line, and love to help you get the most value out of your investment in AIM products and software. So give us a holler. The some contact information as we kind of close this one down. That tech support line is down there at the bottom of the slide, and my email address is there. I think most of you know it by now, but Roger at AIM Sports. If you need anything, if you want to talk a little bit more about user profiles and maybe sharing of the user profiles that we've seen today, make sure you let me know via email. We'll get back with you, and we can chat about that. So for those of you that are live, hang on for a moment. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Talk to you soon.